Angie, can you hear me?
Hi, Kurt.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thanks for coming
Okay,
on.
perfect.
Um,
What do you need me to do? Just read the questions as we go?
yeah, do you see the question box there?
Yeah, the little
The
chat box.
question on the dashboard on the right, the control panel, there's a
Yes.
question. Okay. So yeah, people when they type in, you should be able to just see the questions come up right there. You can just chime in whenever. There's a few points where I'll have some questions for people and we'll be asking people to respond. So, but if somebody just has a question throughout, you just kind of interrupt me.
Okay, sounds good. And then how do I mute myself in case something happens over here?
Do you
I
see
got
a
it.
little microphone? Okay.
Yep, I got it. So there's crazy
I'll
noise
have
behind me.
you I'll have you introduce yourself actually in just a
Okay.
minute. Okay. Okay, so we'll give it a minute and let other people arrive. I am wondering, you might have pressed something. We might actually already be live.
Oh, are we?
It might be. I think we are.
Oh,
Yep. So hi everybody. We're gonna wait for others to join us. So give us just a minute. Hmm. And Kurt, I think you're muted, but you also have the opportunity to turn on your webcam so people can see you if you'd like. Usually Shasta and I are both showing.
oh yeah, sure. Let's see. Where do
Okay.
I find my webcam?
There's a little camera looking icon. Just press that. There you are. Hi.
Hey, here I am.
Good, good to see you. All right, let's just give it a couple minutes. And for folks on the line that got here early, thanks for joining. Could you just confirm for us, maybe somebody put something in the question box, just let us know that you can hear us and see our screen.
Yep, it looks like we have a everything's working fine. Christopher.
Great. All right. A couple more minutes till we start and just hang on tight. All right. Well, hi all. I see plenty of people have already hopped on and some others will probably join us. I want to say hello to folks all over the country today. We do not have Shasta with us. She's on work travel. But in her place, we have a key member of her team. So please help me welcome Kurt. And Kurt,
Hey, I'm the new Shasta for today.
yeah, Kurt, tell them what you do for the Paula Band Mission Indians.
So I am the wildlife biologist slash natural resources guy slash climate change guy. And I essentially work under Shasta, do a lot of the climate science stuff and help with some of the plans and writing and things, whatever needs to be done. I'm here to do it.
Yep, and Kurt has been part of a lot of this information that we're going to share with you today. He's been subjected to a lot of it and participated in a lot of it. So he is going to be great, and he's going to make sure that I don't miss any of your questions or comments. And who knows, I may just hand some questions over to him and he can help us out. Okay, so this is our 7th webinar, 7th out of 10. So in our Tribal Climate and Health Adaptation series. So today we're going to continue with the second part of our overview of vulnerability assessments. So if you were with us last time, we went over the main overview of how adaptation planning generally works, the phases. We dove into the first couple steps of vulnerability assessments. And really we're talking about how communities begin addressing their climate and health impacts. And so I'm excited about today. We're going to pick up where we left off, and we're going to dive deep into fact finding and data analysis. And we are going to share some tools with you that are going to make the process more manageable, because this is an area where some people get frustrated or stuck or confused. So, in fact, I just presented on this topic at the EPA Region 9 Tribal Conference in Phoenix, and I think some of you might have been there. As always, our goal is going to be to help you feel more prepared and knowledgeable to conduct your own climate adaptation work. And today, again, as usual, there's going to be opportunities for interaction. So be prepared to chime in and feel free to ask questions throughout. All right, let's get going. Okay, so as always, we usually start with a suggested reading. So last time we suggested that you read one of 3 proposed reports. And so each of these reports is from different parts of the country. They're all variations of a vulnerability assessment. The first one came from the Paula Band Mission Indians. And so this is the vulnerability assessment that we did for Paula. We finished it last year. And another one comes from the Blackfeet tribe, the Blackfeet Nation in Montana. And it's a full climate change adaptation plan. And the last one is a health-focused vulnerability assessment or health assessment on climate change in Kiana, Alaska. And so we'll talk a little bit about it. I'm going to get you guys started. If you could use the question box to provide some feedback. Did anything surprise you about these reports? If you picked one, could you tell us if you liked anything about the structure, what was sort of unique about it, and if you notice any kind of types of information sources that were referenced throughout, or any other thoughts you might have had. So go ahead and use that question box and share thoughts on any of these readings. I'll share with you a few thoughts of my own. So obviously, you know, I was part of writing the vulnerability assessment for Paula. This is a document that's actually available to you in a Word version that was developed and designed so that it could be replicated and used, customized by any tribe around the country. We organized ours according to exposure area. So for Paula, that meant temperature, wildfire, drought, and storms and flooding. And from there, it's organized by impact. So the exposures trigger certain impacts. And then it summarizes the most highly prioritized and most significant vulnerabilities for each of those exposures. On the other hand, the Blackfeet report is organized more like by sector. And so they have a health sector, they have agriculture, by sector. It combines both vulnerability assessment and also follows up with strategy, so adaptation plan material. The Kiana, Alaska report focuses primarily on health, and it's organized by natural resource area. So I believe they have river, air, water, And so there's lots of different ways. There's an art to how you can organize this information. And really in presenting this, you get an idea of how these things look in practice and all the options you have for organizing it. So Kurt, do you see anybody with any comments or in the question box?
I don't have any questions right now in the question box, no.
Okay. Well, if you can always look at these. There are many, many more you can look at if you want to start getting examples of vulnerability assessments. All of these, you'll notice as you look at them, they all do a good job of incorporating knowledge and observations from the local people, from members of the tribe. And they also do a good job of describing the community, including in many cases the community's values and priorities. So some things to focus on when you start looking at other plans and assessments. Okay, it's actually at this point I would like to launch a quick poll for folks on the line. All right, and Kurt, you let me know that this pops up. Let's see. Okay. So the question is, it is up, right, Kurt?
Yes, poll is up.
Oh, great. Okay, so it's just asking you to describe your experience finding useful facts and data and information for when your tribe does vulnerability work, or when you're doing any kind of adaptation work. What has been your experience in finding information? And so your options are frustrating, confusing, and slow, time-consuming but productive, easy and manageable, or maybe you haven't tried yet, or other. And we'll just give it another few seconds here. I see 61% of you have voted so far. Let's hear from a few more of you, and then we'll close it and I'll show you the results. So far, I see a clear winner emerging. Okay, so we're at about 80%, and I'll give it 5 more seconds and close it. Okay. And I'm going to close. Okay, so you should be looking at the results. Looks like that's good. Only 11% of you feel it's frustrating, confusing, and slow. 53% of you say it's time-consuming but productive. Only 5% say easy and manageable. I want to talk to you guys about how you've made it easy and manageable. And 26% haven't tried yet, and 5% have some other feeling. Feel free to use the question box to share your thoughts on this, on your experiences. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and hide those results, but that's good to know. I agree. It can be extremely time-consuming to go out and look for facts. So we are going to talk today in great detail about how we recommend doing that, where some places you can go to make that process easier. And we actually have a tool that we developed that can assist as well. So a lot of what we'll do today is be working within that tool, kind of give you a demo and show you how it works and point you to some data sources. Okay, so last time we chatted, we went over the first couple of steps of vulnerability assessments. If you remember, we went over determining objectives and scope, and then we talked quite a bit about engaging the community. So at this point, you know what you're going to look at in your vulnerability study. You generally might have some ideas about what your community's experiences have been, their concerns, their priorities, or values. And now you really need to get into the meat of answering the big question of the vulnerability assessment, which is, what are my community's most significant vulnerabilities? And how are you going to... We have a
comment from Mark Junker.
Yep.
Data that is on the meaningful scale is archived uniformly, so it does not take a PhD to interpret. Makes sense to non-experts and is very difficult to find and curate in meaningful ways.
Yeah, right, exactly. That's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up. I have spent a lot of time trying to find where that pre-calculated, pre-analyzed, credible data is really coming from, and I'm going to share with you as much as I have learned. So, okay, so now we're at the point where we're trying to answer the big question, and then how are you going to actually answer that question? How are you going to determine your most significant vulnerabilities? You're going to need quite a bit of information. information, then you want to boil down on what questions you need answered. And another way to say that is to say, what indicators are you going to look for information for? And indicators are a trend or a fact that indicates the state or level of something. And so really it's just a piece of information that's sort of measurable that you can look at to make some decisions about how things are looking, how things are working. And so there's different kinds. The way we talk about indicators, there's kind of three sets. You can look at exposure and secondary exposure indicators. So you remember from our earlier webinars, we went through the top 5 exposures and 4 secondary exposures. So those include heat, melting ice and sea level rise, worsened air quality, vector-borne vector changes. So those are exposures. Exposures are climate changes that are occurring and at some point come into contact with our community. And then there's a whole set of impact indicators, meaning when it does come into contact with your community, it's going to make some kind of an impact on health, your social environment, your natural environment, and your built environment. And it's kind of where the rubber hits the road. It's why we care. It's because it's going to do some potential harm to the things we care about. And then there's a third set, and those are population sensitivity and adaptive capacity indicators. Talked a little bit about that the last time. These all factor in, these are moderating factors to vulnerability, meaning population sensitivity would tell me what characteristics in a community might make me more sensitive to climate changes. Adaptive capacity might be indicators, those might tell me that my community is more equipped and more ready and has the better capacity to adapt. And so we're going to go through some examples of those. And so what I'd like to do now is actually show you where I want to introduce you to a tool. Our key tool is the Tribal Climate Health Project's Exposures, Impacts, and Strategies Inventory. We call it EASY Tool for short. And let me show you where you can find it. And you can actually just go, you're probably on your computer now, just go online and download it right now and work along with us. So if you go to the tribalclimatehealth.org website, so tribalclimatehealth.org, and under the Learn tab, a drop-down will appear and you can go to something called Training Materials. And I can actually just do this with you, but this is a screenshot. On that page, if you scroll down a little bit, you can you'll see this material. And the top one on the screenshot shows Adaptation Planning Tool. And there's the EASY Tool. The blue text is a link. You can download it. Like it says, it's a beta version, and so we're still looking for people to use it and comment on it and give us their feedback. But that's where to find it. So go ahead and download it if you'd like. You'll notice it's an Excel tool, so it isn't super high tech, but it is organized in a relational database with a lot of information, hopefully that makes things a little easier for you. So I'm going to start showing you how this thing looks, and instead of showing you a screenshot, I'm just going to go ahead and pull up how it looks. So this is the live tool. Like I said, it's in Excel. This is just a cover page with some instructions. You can see it's organized the way we have organized this whole training by this framework that talks about exposures, secondary exposures, impacts, and then eventually strategies. And so there's different tabs, and the first tab we'll look at is one that helps you to evaluate exposures. And so right here on this column, so column K, is a whole column on exposure indicators. And so here on the left, on column A, is the actual primary exposure. And so I've got all of the exposures here in column A. So it goes from drought, and then it has secondary exposures. Any secondary exposures that the literature connects and relates with the primary exposure would be listed here. And it goes through each of the 5, so melting ice and sea level rise, storms and flooding, temperature, and wildfire. And so one thing that's kind of handy and would actually help you from the get-go is if you were to take these filters and just filter for your region. So say you're in the Southwest, you could just remove the blanks here and just leave yourself with where it's coded for X's, and it will just populate for you the exposures and secondary exposures that may be the greatest risk for your region. And so, for example, you can see right now we're looking at, this is a whole section on drought. This is a long list of potential indicators you could look at to see how much exposure your community has to drought. And so this is pulling from best practices and all the best climate science and the best literature I could find. How are folks most credibly, usefully, meaningfully measuring the level of exposure they have? And so, for example, days of no precipitation or dry days, that's one key way to look at for drought. Another one is there's something called a Palmer Drought Severity Index, or you could look at rain as a percentage of total precipitation, or precipitation totals, stream flow. There's a lot of different ways to look at it. And on here, I even have some sections for you to just include more anecdotal or local observations of what folks in your community are observing. So this is basically a long list of indicators that you can use. And so similarly, and we're going to go through what the rest of this spreadsheet does, similarly on impacts, same kind of thing. I have a whole list by exposures, what the literature is telling us, what impacts are associated with what exposures. And so, for example, start here at the top. This is actually the exposure's temperature. And this first one is heat-related stress, illness, and death. So that's a possible impact. And then that impact can be measured by a variety of different impact indicators. So potentially, one is heat stress, emergency room visits, heat-related deaths, heat-related mortality in the summertime. And so there's a variety of different ways to measure. And so this is giving you a pretty exhaustive list, so you don't have to do this work. You don't have to decide, what should I be looking at? What exposures might be meaningful for me? What impacts might be meaningful for me? And how do I measure it? This does some of that work for you. Although all of this is customizable and editable, so that if you want to edit and customize this for yourself, you can. You can add more indicators. You certainly don't have to use each and every one. So let me go back to slides for just a second. So that's basically where you find the inventory of indicators. Like I said, they're for each exposure, for each impact. So once you know what information you want to find that's going to help you make meaningful decisions, then you actually have to go out and find the information. Having the indicator isn't enough. All then you're basically left with is a question, meaning how severe or likely is this exposure or impact coming to my community? So what we suggest here is to find the best data or information to tell the story, and that can come from a variety of different sources. So generally, we would want to look for information to tell us trends. So you would want to see for a particular data set, so say average temperature. What's the historical average temperature, the baseline or current average temperature, and ideally, you can find projected information, so future information, where climate modelers or climate scientists are modeling information for the future based on what they know about climate change. And for each indicator, it's great if you have that whole gamut of information. It's hard to find sometimes. Sometimes you'll find a piece of it, but not all of it. The other thing we tell folks is to find information that is as location specific as possible. And so you might find the best, you have a great indicator, say you want to know premature deaths associated with heat, extreme heat events, and you say that would be really good to know. But it's only available on a state basis, and I think that's actually true. So, okay, I'm going to go to the CDC and they tell me by state. And so that's good and it's better than nothing. But if you're a tribe, you might have some confounding factors. There might be some reasons why premature death might occur differently on your reservation than it would the state at large. And so we recommend finding as specific information as you can. So sometimes the big databases out there will actually downscale the data or allow you to get as specific as maybe a census tract or a boundary, jurisdictional boundary, and those are great. But in general, you kind of use as downscaled as you can get, as location specific as you can get. And Ideally, those kinds of data sets might even come pre-calculated, so you don't have to do a tremendous amount of data analysis. It's sort of been done for you. And sometimes even come with really cool visualizations, which might look like a chart or a graph or a map. Okay, so information sources vary really widely. And while we talk about this, I'd like to invite folks to share in the question box what information sources you've used for your tribe. If you've done some of this work, what are some of your favorites that you'd like to share with other tribes? And that could come from publications, databases, online. You know, you can go to, maybe you have a technical assistant, so share where you're getting your best data. So information sources vary widely. Some people have been lucky enough to go out and actually get technical assistance. Technical assistance can come in the form of, you know, you can pay for it, you can get consultants. You might be lucky enough to have somebody offering free technical assistance. There are regional climate centers. So those are, if you look on the top right of this slide, that's a map of the regional climate centers that are operated by NOAA all around the country. So they are available and they archive a lot of climate related data, and sometimes they'll develop specific tools that may or may not already be available online. I just actually spoke this week to the Western Regional Climate Center, the WRCC, and they serve that whole pink area in the West. And so she was clear that they can do some assistance, but they can't dive really deeply and do your vulnerability assessment for you. They mainly have historical climate data. You can request specific data. The best they really do is to point you in the right direction of where that lives and sometimes help you interpret it.
Angie, we're getting some good comments about places to find good data.
Okay.
We got Mark Junker saying U.S. Drought Monitor. They have the monthly drought outlook, seasonal drought outlook, seasonal climate forecasts, USGS stream gauge data, which we use on Paula too, crop moisture index, topsoil moisture monitoring, experimental surface water monitor, VEG, VEGDRI, which I haven't used, EDDI, SC, ACIS, NWS flood data, Army Corps dam releases. And then Aaron Jones is saying University of Washington Climate Impact Group has been providing good data in the Northwest region.
Yes, yes. I'm going to share a little screenshot of them with you guys in just a moment. Those are awesome. Thank you guys. I'm going to have to take another look at that list and make sure I'm aware of all of those. Okay, so let's go back to where these information sources may lie. You guys are pointing us to some really good ones. Most of those sound like they are online databases. So for technical assistance, try your regional climate center. At least get in touch and find out how much assistance they can provide, and maybe they have some sort of ready-made pre-calculated data they can offer to you, or they can make suggestions about where to go find it in your area. You might also have universities that have climate centers that do this kind of work and would be pleased to work with their local communities. There are also tribal epidemiology centers. So I don't know if you remember, I think it was our second webinar, maybe third, we had somebody from the Tribal Epidemiology Center in California come and speak with us and talk to us about what they do. That map there on the bottom right is showing you again where the tribal epidemiology centers are in the country. And if you go to them, they're going to be really one of the best places to find health related information. A lot of that's relevant for climate vulnerability assessments. And so there's 11 of them around the country, and you can reach out to the one that serves your area and at least make contact. They may be they have a formal data request process that you can undergo. You can also mine from local, state, and national reports. I do that often when I can't find sort of a clean data set. I will go pull from a credible source elsewhere. There's also, you would want to use local observations and traditional knowledges as well. So maybe you gathered some of that when you were doing community engagement in that last step. And also national and regional databases. So let's talk more about those and some of those that are online, because that's going to be an easy way for you to grab some data. Okay, so back to the easy tool. This is just a screenshot again, but I'm going to go back to the actual tool. This, we're looking at the exposure of drought. You can see again the exposure indicators are in column K, and here is where some data set or data sources are. So I have a whole list here of data sources that are available and accessible to communities nationally, And then because so much of our work has been in California, and California has a lot of really good tools, there's a special piece here for tribes in California where maybe some more specific data could be found. And so if that exists, then it's here. And so these are all links to data sets, and in many cases I linked as specifically as I could to that specific indicator's data. And so this could do a lot of the work for you in terms of finding out how to answer the question of the indicator, how to know, for example, what the trends are, historical, baseline, and projected, maybe, for say something like water pathogens, which are say nitrates in community water systems, or or say we want to know more about air quality, and so you can find out more about days above the regulatory standard of PM 2.5. This is when you download it and look at it, you will notice it's a long list. Sometimes the indicators and the data sources, those are repeated because they might apply to different exposures. Okay, so what I want to do is actually just quickly scan through basically some of these links. So these links point you to online data sets. Here's one that a lot of people know about. This one is actually the Climate Explorer. It's part of the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit. You can look at your specific location only down to county level, but that could be pretty good. In this case, we're looking at days with over 3 inches of rain. So this would be an indicator showing heavy precipitation, meaning it might be an indicator for storms and flooding and how severely that may happen in your region. And I like this one because it's showing you historical and projected information. And it's doing it by maps. You can kind of see relatively how your community is projected to do. So this over here is historical, this over here is projected. You can also toggle around with higher emissions or lower emissions. On this site, you can also toggle back and forth between charts and tables as well. You don't only have to look at map views, but this is one good database. And so it has a lot of different indicators on here, mainly precipitation and temperature related, but some key ones. Here's another one. I love this one, and since we're doing a trainings focused so heavily on health, the CDC's National Environmental Public Health Tracking Network is really good. This is one of many indicators that it will provide data for. So we're looking at historical extreme heat days and events, or the number of extreme heat days, and this is showing it to you by county. If you were to toggle over here, you could look at historical information. This is just showing you 2016, so you could actually look, I think, as far down as maybe the early 2000s. And you can see on a map how you relate to other places. You can also go over here. You can download a chart or a table instead, so that you could kind of look more deeply at the numbers, and you can do things like 3-year averages and stuff if you'd like. So you can get a quick picture of how you're doing in terms of heat days just by looking at this quick snapshot. Here's another one, Surging Seas. This is a risk zone map. Another map-based tool, but if you're a coastal community, this is a place to go where you can look at different scenarios for sea level rise increase and how it's projected to impact your community. So it's looking at inundation levels, communities that would be affected, and it also looks at things like population, income, property, social vulnerabilities. So it's another good one to look at. So if you're a community that's concerned about sea level rise, surging seas may be a good place to look. Another one I really like is Temperate. This is just a screenshot that I did of, I was just tinkering around with Santa Barbara County data. And so you can go onto here, and there's a whole, this one is trying to be more comprehensive. A lot of the data sets out there are kind of showing you a few of the pieces of a full comprehensive vulnerability assessment. And so it's up to you to deal with this, navigating around all these various sites and then pulling from the best. Temperate's one that is doing a good job of pulling from many and aggregating it into one decision tool that's kind of helping you make steps along the whole process. And so here's one place to go where you could look at information that might range from drought, avalanche, coastal flooding, and they talk about top hazards. And so you can go on there and probably, I think at this stage across the country as low as county level, in some cases city. And so you can look at your local information that way. This one I will mention, you can get a free trial, but there is a subscription fee. A couple more that I like, so if you're looking for things like vector-borne disease related information, which we do, the CDC has a lot of different data sets. So here's one on Lyme disease maps. They have different ones on West Nile, Zika, and so you can look at maps and you can also look at the base data as well. So you can look at tables as well and just get disease rate cases and things like that. Also, in your community, maybe your county runs a Fight the Bite program. Recommend you look for one. It might exist. Fight the Bite is usually run by a county and is providing local statistics on vector-borne disease and sometimes things like mosquito surveillance or tick surveillance. Here's another one. This is national. It's from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and it's called County Health Rankings. And so here you can find a lot of different information, a lot of health-related information. In this case, things like quality of life. So kind of unique indicators here, like poor physical health days, poor mental health days. This could be interesting if you're trying to see how your community is faring now versus the past, or this might be something you look and you track over time as climate conditions get worse. It also has something called Food Environment Index and basic, like a lot of the population sensitivity factors could be found here. So somebody had mentioned the University of Washington's tribal climate tool. And so the climate impacts group at the University of Washington has done a great job of producing a pretty comprehensive tool for its tribes. It's only for the Pacific Northwest. But you can go in and you can choose your tribe, and it focuses in on your area of interest, and then it will give you some key information about key indicators. So it does the data analysis for you and it maps it. So it's pretty cool. It's only available, like I said, to Pacific Northwest tribes. But I think once you're done kind of selecting for your tribe, then it actually populates out a little report for you. In California, like I said, we have a lot of information. Communities have, a lot of regions have their own specific data sets that are really good. For example, CalEnviroscreen in California has a ton of environmental information, including, in this case, we're looking at an ozone map. So if you're looking for worsened air quality, it'll say how is, we know that increases in temperature is going to exacerbate ozone problems. So here you can see California already has a pretty significant ozone problem here currently, and so this is current data. And then another one for California is CalAdapt. CalAdapt has quite a few indicators that you can look at. And so one here is maximum temperature, and it's showing you, this is showing you historical to projected actually as well. So it's really good. And then what I like about this is it's showing kind of a snapshot. So it's telling you historical annual mean. This is for temperature historically versus modeled. And so you can see just a quick number for how things are expected to change. This one's cool because a lot of times you actually can go down to the tribal boundary and you can go down at least to census tracts. Okay, so that's like a short list or short representative sampling of the number of indicators that are in the EASY tool. So there's a lot more, and so basically, like I said, it goes by exposure, and you can look diving down into secondary exposures and impacts and find data for a lot of them. I don't have data sources for all of them, but maybe you do. Maybe you can help us fill in. Okay, so once you have filled in data, and actually before I go here, let me actually go back to the EASY tool, and I want to kind of show you a little bit more about how it works and how it's helping you arrive at a decision about your most significant vulnerabilities. And so here, the first step we recommend is to evaluate your exposures. And so you would go through, and for any of these that seem relevant, any of the indicators that seem relevant, You could try out these data sources, or you can find a more specific, location-specific or meaningful data source for you. You could actually use the easy tool as a worksheet, and you can populate in numbers, links, anecdotal observations into this historical baseline and projected cells. So this is drought. So say you've found as much information as you can, you would go across, and then you're kind of making a decision. High, medium, or low, what's your exposure risk level? And so you're basically prioritizing the exposure risk. And so that's how the majority of folks that I see do this work. It gets simplified down to high, medium, or low, or none. Because at some point you have to make a decision about whether or not this is something worth addressing. And so say, for example, you said drought is a high risk for you. Then you can go to the impacts tab, and you can actually filter for things that you've decided are maybe high and medium risk only. So maybe in your community, drought's a high risk, temperature's a high risk, but maybe like sea level rise is not a high risk. So you just have decided that you're not going to look specifically at those impacts as much. And so you could actually narrow down the things that you're looking at that way, and then only look at the impacts associated with the exposures that you are concerned about. And so, for example, you say your temperature is a high risk for you, then you probably would be looking at heat-related stress and different illnesses. The other way to use this tool is if you've decided that you are only looking at health in your vulnerability assessment, you only want to look at health impacts, you could filter only for health-related impacts. If you're only looking at natural environment impacts, you can filter for that. You can filter for only built environment impacts. So it's customizable based on what it is you're actually looking to do with your vulnerability assessment. So again, look at the indicator, check out the data source, punch in your historical baseline or projected information. And so that's a lot of the information you will use to make a determination. Again, this is sort of the final determination. How severe and likely is it that the impact will come to my community? So this is your vulnerability determination. So again, high, medium, or low. And this will end up being your shorter list of the things that you're actually going to address in your adaptation plan. And so one more thing to highlight here is it's hidden right now, but there's a whole list of, it's coded for things like your population sensitivity and adaptive capacity measures, so that you can also factor these in when you make your determination about impact or vulnerability. And so these are also listed here. So what I want to do is just show you this list. This is the list of population sensitivity and adaptive capacity indicators. And so things like population in the 100-year flood area. Well, that's going to be relevant for certain impacts that are associated with flooding. Urban heat island index. You can find that information. That's pretty relevant if you're concerned about temperature impacts. So there's quite a bit of them. And again, there's data sources, and there's a place to put your findings. So then say if you're going along and you say, all right, well, I know temperature is a high risk. The literature tells me that possible impacts is heat-related stress. That's something that my community is interested in and concerned about. I've looked at these indicators. The data is showing that either things have already begun to get bad from historical to baseline, or I have projections to show me that things are projected to get worse. And I looked across, and there are some population sensitivity factors that are showing me that I'm at increased risk, and we haven't done a whole lot to adapt yet. Therefore, maybe I'm at high risk. Okay, so let's go back to the, so like I said, a lot of times we're just looking at prioritizing high, medium, or low. And so how you do that can be challenging. Usually it's not just one person making this decision. So first you have to decide who actually makes that decision. And so ideally you have your planning team that you might have put together in step 2 that's going to be working together to make these kinds of decisions. And so you can do some kind of like community ranking, you could do polling, or maybe you have a smaller group of folks who are making an initial decision and then presenting it, and you're getting feedback on it from a larger group. That's a lot of times the way I see it. Sometimes you might have a consultant or an advisor, technical assistant on board who might recommend a certain ranking, and then it's getting cross-checked by the members of the planning team. So different ways to go about it. You do want to establish criteria for how you will evaluate the rankings. And so, for example, we've said in our training that we usually look at vulnerability as a calculation of exposure risk plus impact risk plus population sensitivity minus adaptive capacity, meaning you'll reduce your risk if you have adaptive capacity. And so basically you're just looking across all the information you're able to collect to make your ranking decision. The struggle here is there's a lot of information to consider to make a ranking, and then you're making a ranking on a lot of different potential impacts, and so it just ends up being a lot of information. So the other thing to mention here is that we had talked at the last time about factoring in the impact, whether the impact is going to affect community assets. So community assets are a whole list of values, resources, assets that your community may value. And we gave you a survey which helped you to get input from your community about what they value the most, which assets they value the most. This is another piece of information to factor in here. The vulnerabilities that are going to impact your valued assets are probably something that should get pretty highly ranked, right? So say your community cared, in their survey says they really care deeply about physical health, the health of their residents. And you've noticed that heat-related illness is something really highly likely to be severely impacting your community. That might deserve a high vulnerability score.
You had a comment that duration of warning time can impact your ranking as well.
That's right. I'm sorry, duration and?
Warning time.
Yeah, I know. Different iterations of this tool, I've actually had a part to talk about duration. So basically, you could talk about term, how soon is this impact projected to impact your community? So you could just do short, medium, and long term. That's another way to look at it. And so that may not modify your risk level, but it might give you an indicator about how quickly you need to respond and act. Okay, let's see. I'm going to look at timing. Okay, we do have a little time for this. I actually want to give us a chance as a group to kind of work in this a little bit more in an applied way. So in person, when we did this in person at Paula, we actually had folks work on their workshop companion form. We had an exercise where folks were kind of toying around with starting to dive into the data for their own community. But since I have you on your computers, hopefully with internet right now, I hope that you've actually already gone and downloaded the tool. So let's go ahead and bring this tool back up. And we're just going to look at a couple of these indicators together. Okay, so say we are one of the communities that might be at risk for drought in terms of climate change exposure. We're going to look at days of no precipitation or dry days and look back at that. Let's look back at Climate Explorer. So here we go. This link is going to populate to that indicator, which is great. Now we're going to want to potentially zoom to a location, and I think I will look at, let's see, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Okay, so kind of zoomed me in, and it's looking at dry days. And so this is showing me that the lower emissions scenario in 29 is showing me the 2090 figure. I can toggle this back and forth and look at different data. So I can look at what it looks like today or in 2020 versus what things are looking like, projected to look like in 2090. So there's different, obviously here you can look at different levels of data. So this was dry days. Yeah, so you can look at that in different ways. So that's one. Say we wanted to look at that indicator, I would be looking at, this isn't showing me historical information on this one, but I could at least fill in for myself, I could fill in his baseline and historic data for, say, down to my county level. So here's a chart. So say you want to get down to your county. Right now I just popped in San Diego. This is showing me a chart, which is showing me maybe a slight increase that I can see in dry days over time. And so let me actually bring this down. This is showing me through from 2050 to 2090. I really like it because I have historical, baseline, and projected data. If I actually want, and I recommend doing this, a lot of these sites will let you go ahead and download an image. So click that and it will let you download an image. You can save that and you can plop that right into your vulnerability assessment. You can also click here and this will show you data. So observed data, you see this will allow you to download some Excel spreadsheets and you can do your own analysis if you want. So for example, we're still here looking at dry days. In this case, we're looking actually at San Diego. And what I like to do sometimes if I have information like this that's good and also requires a little bit of analysis, I might do a 3 or 5 year average. So this would give me a good 5-year historical average. So I'm taking 2050 to 2054 and the average is 304.56 dry days. Then I'd be going down as far as I could. So this would be considered more baseline data. I'll take the 5-year average more recently, and it's 303.58 dry days. So I think that was a slight increase, but it's not showing, this is not showing a dramatic change in dry days for San Diego. It's also not giving me, this one didn't give me projections, but I can, in the climate tool, actually get projected model data as well. So same kind of thing, and I can use the Excel information. Now this still may seem like a lot of work for you to look at this information, but man, is it nice that it's here for you to look at in different ways. So that's one example. Let's look at one, maybe another one here. Here's maybe a simpler one to look at. So in this case, we are looking at severe storms and flooding. And one exposure indicator would be the change in total annual precipitation falling in the heaviest 1% of events. And so there is, in this case, I'm pulling from a publication. So this is the National Climate Assessment, most recent one. And they've done the data analysis and they've created this pretty cool graphic of the observed change in total annual precipitation falling in the heaviest 1% of events. And so it's showing you historical, and then it's showing you projected. And so you could look, it's not giving you a chance to dial in super detailed, but you can get a general idea based on this color legend about how things are projected to change in terms of heavy rainfall. So, and there's better places to look for heavy precipitation as well. So say, actually that Temperate site's a pretty good one for that. And then let's quickly go, and maybe you're doing this together with me, and if you are, go ahead and plop in your, look for your own local information as we go. And start dropping in some information into the data findings worksheet. So again, that would be this red box basically is places where you can drop in your own information. So let's go ahead. We talked about temperature quite a bit, temperature extremes, and we said that heat-related stress, illness, and death was one of the impacts. So let's look at heat stress emergency department visits. So if we look here, we're going to pull back up that CDC website. Okay, this goes directly to that indicator, and so we're looking at heat stress emergency department visits all over the country. It's giving us a map. I can look at earlier years, so I can try to get as historical as I can. And so sometimes this is a challenge, right? Maybe your state is not showing up here. Maybe the state is not reporting on an annual basis. So if you're here, great. If you're not, then you might have to find a different source. But say here's Utah, and this is an age-adjusted rate of emergency visits per 100,000 people. So 8.7 people per 100,000 people have heat stress emergency department visits. And again, you can actually download the data. You could export the table, and you could do like 3 to 5 year averages, so you can get a better idea of historical versus baseline. CDC, this tool, awesome, doesn't do projections, at least not yet. Okay, so those are some examples of how you might use the tool. It's a shortcut to finding possible data sources. And I really hope it saves you a lot of time and confusion in terms of where to start looking and what to start looking for. Are there questions? So we have a few minutes. We can talk a little bit about questions on this tool. Kurt, has anything else come up?
I do not see any questions or comments yet.
Okay, well, let me show you one more thing, because I did mention that we could also be factoring in assets. So there's some things that when you download this are hidden because it just gets kind of complicated. So here's where those threatened community assets are sitting. So all the things that were in the survey, from physical wellness to mental and emotional wellness to traditional knowledges and practices, wildlife, water resources, agriculture, infrastructure. Your community may have ranked which of these things are high, medium, and low priority. And so you may, when you go into this, have an idea of those things that you're basically directed or should be most careful to protect. And so, for example, you can even just filter, show me all the things that are, this is coded, show me all the potential impacts that might affect physical wellness. And so those might be the impacts you're paying a lot of attention to because you know your community is highly sensitive or interested in protecting that. And so as you go through, like I said, at the end of the day, you're really looking to make a decision about vulnerability. And so when you get to the point where you're ready to rank, you're going to want to take into account exposure risk, the impact data, and then modifying that for your population sensitivity and adaptive capacity, and then making sure you're focused on what impacts are going to hit the assets that your community cares about a lot. Okay. So back to the slides. I hope that wasn't tremendously confusing. It's a demo, and if you do have questions as you maybe start working into it, you can always reach out. And also, here's the deal, you don't have to use that at all. You may have your own system that you might want to use, your own worksheet, another organization's system, whatever. This is just available to you to help you fill in information if you'd like, or you can use the whole system. There's also a piece of this that we'll talk about next time that helps you tie the impacts that you've decided were most critical, so like your biggest vulnerabilities, then to help you start selecting potential adaptation strategies and to do some initial adaptation planning. So we'll talk about that the next time, because next time we're getting into adaptation.
I was just going to say,
okay,
folks are welcome to reach out to Shasta and I too, because we've done a lot of this stuff with you. So if they have questions that they want to ask from your tribal folks, that employees that have done stuff.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, so just to wrap up this section, the last step, once you've gone through, you've found all your data and your information, you've made some decisions about what's your most significant vulnerabilities, you've prioritized those, now you put it into some sort of a report. So this is actually optional. Some communities opt to just take this information and then move right into adaptation planning, meaning finding strategies and coming up with a way to select strategies. And we're going to talk about all that next time, but some communities decide they don't need a report in between, but we sort of recommend doing a report because this is a good stop point to make sure that you're bringing people along with you, to make sure that your findings, that your community is aware of the findings, that your tribal leadership has had a chance to take a look at the findings and maybe is even directing you to proceed forward to find solutions through an adaptation plan. And so we recommend that you incorporate in this plan visual stories and quotations from community members to make the document compelling to community members and decision makers, because you want it to be readable by all. You would want to consider how to use and protect proprietary traditional knowledge information. So the communities I work with, oftentimes they'll tell me, I can share this information with you, but this cannot go into a report because in some cases it can be, used against them in certain ways. And so obviously, I think you all know a lot about traditional knowledge consent and how to use that properly. And then you have the opportunity to present the report to decision makers. And so oftentimes it comes in the form of a report. I've seen it done in the form of even a video, or just maybe it's just a slideshow. But like we said at the very beginning of this session, we gave you a template. So that vulnerability assessment template is basically Paula's vulnerability assessment report, and you can download the Word version and you can customize it, use the structure, use the citations, as much as you'd like. And so here's how to find it. Go back to that tribalclimatehealth.org page and go right to sample reports, and you can download the vulnerability assessment in Word. Okay, so that was the last step for vulnerability assessments. And at the end of this section, so this was the end of what we call Module 3. And if you go to your, the handout, there's actually, if you go to your, on the right, the dashboard or the control panel, there's a handout. You might have downloaded it previously, the workshop companion form. If you go to that, you can download that. Take a look at section 3, and there's just basically a list of reflection questions after we've gone through this vulnerability assessment material, so you can make sure you're capturing some of your initial thoughts and ideas as we go along that you're going to use in your own community. So we just recommend you take a few minutes, maybe when we're done here, to do that. And then finally, we just have a suggested reading for you. So like I said, actually what's really cool, we had a guest, it was Kurt. Thank you, Kurt, for participating today. Next time on November 19th, in 2 more weeks, we will have another guest person. This will be a guest speaker who's going to spend some time talking to us about energy resilience. And that's going to be part of a conversation, part 1 of adaptation planning. So that's when we shift focus from looking at where the vulnerabilities are to what are we going to do about it. Now, adaptation plans help us address the vulnerabilities. So we're going to pick up there next time. And actually, even the webinar after that has a guest speaker as well. So we're going to jazz things up a little bit here in the next couple of webinars. And then, yeah, we just have 3 left after this. And then, so I mentioned the suggested reading. This is coming from Oregon Climate and Health Resilience Plan. So this is State of Oregon's Climate and Health Resilience Plan, and it's just the executive summary, so it's super short. But as we start talking about adaptation strategies, this is a good summary of what they're going to do to protect their community's health in the state of Oregon from the impacts of climate change. So take a look at that. It'll help you start thinking in terms of adaptation strategies. So I'll stop there and just see if there's any final comments or questions for today. Kurt, any final thoughts?
Somebody was very excited to show their coworkers the tool, which is good. And they're thanking us for putting this together, so that's good. And I will say too, if anybody has questions related to wildlife specifically, that's kind of my background. I'm happy to answer. Get you some resources that I have available.
Cool. Yeah, thank you, Kurt. And thank you all. I think we'll go ahead and close out here. We will see you in a couple more weeks. Take care.